if they figure it out with Chip Kelly calling ball plays and everything they have coming back, I think Ohio State is the biggest problem for the entire country.
Hello and welcome in. It's always college football. We hope you had a terrific weekend. We know we did. The portal's closed. There's been a little bit of move, but nothing crazy. But we are going to have a great big picture conversation with Matt Barrie today on the May 6th edition of Always College Football. I'm Greg McElroy. Alongside, as always, is Jack Foster. Not alongside today is Mark Kubiak, who is taking his 13th vacation here of 2024. But Jake Garcia is here as well, and we appreciate you guys coming to us wherever it is you're coming to us from, whether that's via the podcast or if you're here with us via the ESPN YouTube channel. Hit that thumbs up, subscribe to the podcast, download the podcast, and rate the podcast when it's convenient for you. It really helps us out, and we really appreciate all that you've done for us to support the show here over the last 2 years. We look forward to continuing our off-season discussion. We also are going to play a game here in just a little bit called the probability scale. We're going to go 1 to 10, 5 of the biggest topics in the sport, big picture topics, and we're going to put a probability on them. Whether it's 1, whether it's 10, whether it's somewhere in between, we're going to talk about Virginia Tech. We're going to talk about the biggest game in the sport coming up this year. We're going to talk about A&M. Are they a college football playoff contender? And is Ole Miss potentially a top 3 team in the SEC? So we'll do all of that today, and we look forward to visiting with Matt Barrie here on Always College Football. Matt Barrie in, voice of Thursday Night Football, voice of ESPN all throughout the weekend during the college football season, and regular guest here on Always College Football. He also has the Matt Barrie Show is on ESPN YouTube channel as well, so you can always check that out. He does a great job with a lot of those shows as well. So, Matty, we'll start here. The transfer portal came and went.
Yeah.
I want you to describe it with one word. How would you describe the spring transfer portal window?
Stable. And I say stable because we're not going to see anything like we typically see after the season, right? Before the bowl games, before all the New Year's 6 games, and after the regular season, where guys are coming off a long, grueling season. They're bitter, they're grizzled. They've probably been tampered with all year. And so they're getting an opportunity to go to their new school. That's where you're going to see the big influx. Then you settle in for spring ball. Spring ball goes through, and then you're always going to see one of two things. One, you're going to see players that didn't transfer at the end of the season. I'll use Jaden Rashada as a case there, Arizona State. This guy was the quarterback of the future. They bring in Sam Leavitt, Michigan State transfer. Jaden hadn't been healthy. He decides, probably don't want to compete for the job here this year. I'll wait and wait till Carson Beck leaves and maybe be the starter at Georgia. He transfers out. Elijah Badger, same thing. But you have guys that stayed through the end of the regular season. They go to spring ball. Something doesn't sync up with them in spring ball. And then they decide to try their luck one more time prior to summer camp and the fall semester getting started. So I don't think it's as open the floodgates as it is in a regular season. I would say it's stable and something necessarily we didn't not expect of the spring portal window.
Yeah, I feel like if I could describe it, it'd be underwhelming. You know,
right.
It just what like you're told, oh, this is going to be the biggest portal day of all time. April 16th, the day it opens, going to be the biggest ever. Get ready. And then there really weren't that many massive names. I mean, Jaden Rashada, probably as big a name as there was that was on the move there in the spring portal window. Damian Martinez went to Miami.
Yeah, he was a good one. But yeah, and based on what I was hearing, Greg, there were a couple names that I was hearing, a la the kid that went from Alabama to Caden Proctor, Alabama, Iowa back. I had heard 3 huge names of players that had just left their school out of the regular season, committed to a new school, and then we're going to come back to their old school, and those never materialized. So you're right. It could have been absolute chaos, but it really wasn't.
Yeah, it really didn't deliver the way that a lot of people kind of sold it as getting ready to deliver. And I don't think it's their fault. I think they got misinformation, and maybe there were guys that were on the verge of going in that decided not to at the end of the day. So let's
Yeah,
get to spring
that
ball.
extra money came in right at the
Yeah,
end.
that's amazing. That leverage,
Yeah.
leverage is huge. Extensions and overages. Looking at where things are with spring football. I used to get a lot out of the spring game, Maddie. I don't know if I get as much out of it anymore. I don't even know if the coaches are putting as much into it as they once
Mhm.
did. So just 30,000 foot perspective, how much stock do you put in a spring game performance?
0.
Really?
And I'm with you. I used to love spring games. I mean, I called the Alabama spring game a couple of years ago. And it was an opportunity when we got to look at somebody like, I believe Dallas Turner was a freshman at the time. Will Anderson Jr. was still there. Bryce Young was still there. And you're down on the field walking around and you're like, oh my God, like that's the next great pass rusher to Alabama. And they would get reps. And then I remember in that game specifically, Alabama couldn't block Will Anderson Jr. And I remember Saban saying afterwards, well, if our guys can't block him, like who's going to be able to block him? And so that was a great nugget for us to use throughout the season. I did USC spring game when Lincoln Riley was first year there and Caleb Williams was there, and it was on ESPN, and it was me and it was Galloway and it was RG3, and we were down on the field. We were talking to Lincoln about the USC approach, and it used to be really an opportunity to springboard from winter workouts. Who do you have coming in? And then what are you going to do to set yourself up for the off season? I'm not saying that doesn't still exist, but I think you know as well as anyone, based on where we are with the portal, who's leaving, who's coming, you don't know who's going to be around at this point. I think coaches still put a lot of stock in getting some of the younger guys reps, but overall, as far as the big springboard that I think that we used to have, I just don't know that it exists anymore because of roster turnover. I mean, the guys that are there are going to get their work. They just came through winter conditioning. You're going to see some of the quarterbacks, some of the younger guys get some reps. I mean, Arch Manning, and everybody's talking about what he did down at. Look, it's good for that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if you can get out of spring ball without injuries, if you can get out of spring ball without your roster intact and feeling like you got a good workout in, I'd say now the hype after a spring game, like I said, I don't put much stock into them.
Yeah, and also I feel like more and more coaches, because of what went down at Texas last year, for example. I mean, Malik Murphy went out bald in the spring game, and then everybody wanted him. And then, fast forward 7-8 months, he's still the backup at Texas, got to play 3 games there when Quinn Ewers was hurt. But then he jumps in the portal as soon as the regular season finishes because everybody was after him for 6-7 months. Wasn't even around for the semifinal game. So maybe more and more coaches start to adopt the Lane Kiffin approach and say, hey, we're going to do like a spring, I guess you could call it a festival. Yeah. I mean, it's like festival, tug of war, slam dunk contest, what have you, without really showcasing some of your under the radar talent so that other teams might not get a look at those guys and be willing to maybe tamper with those guys to bring them onto their roster. So how much more do you think we start to see the Lane Kiffin model adopted across the board more so than the traditional game?
Let that sink in for a minute. Let everything you just said sink in for a minute of where we are in college football. That we can't properly develop players in a spring game because we're worried about him getting poached. And we're worried about the portal and the people chatting in the ears and the money think about that for a minute. I would say this right now, I would be so insecure, more insecure than head coaches already are, and panicked about everything. Think about if you're a head coach of where you sit right now, based on everything you're always worried about of being a big time head football coach. Now you have to deal with the fact that, like you just said, I just busted my ass getting these guys fed, put on weight during winter workouts. I did everything I needed to do to develop this player to get him to a point where I believe he can succeed as a great player at my university. I dumped him the resources. I recruited him as a 2-star. I've developed him into a star. But now I have to worry about the 6-month poaching that goes on because that's where we are in college football because it's been allowed. And so this year, and I remember saying it on the YouTube show, and we were kind of discussing it a little bit. I believed, and I think we did see it, that this was going to be the biggest tidal wave of transfer portal stars and head-scratching things that we had ever seen. And when you get right down to it, did anyone ever think Quinshad Judkins would leave what he had at Ole Miss to go play at Ohio State? Well, bad news for everybody. Ohio State finally figured out NIL because then they got Caleb Downs and they have all of these stars. And I just hate that we're in a spot, especially coming after spring ball, where coaches should be getting ready to set their roster going into summer. And they should be getting ready to come out of winter workouts and say, you know what, that freshman that we got, he was undersized, he was underutilized last season, but through the winter, I believe he's going to be a role player for us. But now I can't do it because I'm afraid school X is going to come in there with one of their guys in a bag and say, hey, if you come to us, you're going to start.
Yeah,
and that's sad.
It's crazy where we're at. There's no denying that. Another part that's kind of still a little foreign to me, a little crazy to me, is that we have seen active head coaches go on social media on the offensive for their program and maybe diminish guys that have left, a la what's gone down with Colorado and Deion Sanders. And Shedeur Sanders, frankly, involved in that spat as well. So we look at last year, and I'll be the first to admit, like, I'm a Deion Sanders fan. Have been rooting for him from the beginning, and I feel like he was kind of the baby face of college football. Now it's almost like a heel turn where there's a lot of people that are kind of frustrated with his antics on social media, diminishing what a kid did last year, diminishing what his program might do in the future, or diminishing what kids are leaving the program, how good they were, all these other things. So ultimately, as you take a step back and look at how things have gone for Colorado this offseason, how have things changed for Deion Sanders here in year number 2?
Okay, so I love this topic, and I'm glad we're talking about it because
this felt like a Matty topic. It really did. I feel like you'd be all over this one.
Deion came in, and what was the knock coming into year one? Well, he was at the FCS level. And will that approach at FCS when he had better athletes than everyone translates to the FBS level in a Power 5? So that was the big thing with Deion. Would it translate for him? Would it translate for Shedeur? So he comes in, and Greg, we have all this hype. He's on SportsCenter, College Game Days, every morning, everything is like, will this work for Deion? Well, what happens? They win their first game against a team that played for the national championship the prior year. And you're like, oh no, is this really going to happen? And it started happening again. Then they had the thriller against Colorado State. They beat Nebraska. There's this aura around the program. There's celebrities on the sidelines. Deion is the toast of college football. And then they came back to reality and finished 4-8. And so anyone that was still on the Deion's a miracle worker, well, they were 4-8. I get it. They won one game the year prior. Was there improvement? Yes. Is there star power? Yes. Not denying that. So now year 2, Greg. Now you're in a situation where we know what Deion is. We know what Coach Prime is. He loves publicity. He loves promoting Deion Sanders. He loves promoting his kids, and he loves promoting Colorado football. And he's going to do it very in your face. So now you get to the point where this is my method. This is how I'm going to go about it. And I can do it in a very public way because social media is prevalent everywhere you go. It's not different than what happened at Miami back in the day. It's not different than some of these loudmouth programs back in the early 90s, early 2000s. We just didn't have social media. But the caveat there, those teams competed for and won national championships. And Deion is going to have to do one. The hard coaching thing, I don't mind. Because what is everyone bitch and moan about on social media right now anyway? Oh, they're too soft. Oh, they don't compete. Oh, they're this. Well, if they're going to get publicly chastised by their former head, well, that's the hard coaching people want, right? You can question how it's done, but that's what he's doing. He's just doing it very publicly. And so for me, for Prime, I have no problem with how he's handling it. But he, Prime, better not have problems when we as a college football final crew, or you calling a game, or what we do in college football. He can't have a problem when they're not winning and we come after him. Because you can't have it both ways. You can't be the toast of college football and us praise you at first and then be critical when it's warranted. And so he's going to have to get used to it. They're 4-8 again, like with Shedeur leaving and some of these, Travis Hunter. Well, then what? You know? And so that's my overarching thought. I'm good with him. Do what you got to do. But ultimately, you got to understand, we're going to do what we have to do. And if the product on the field suffers, it's going to get talked about whether he likes it or not.
Yeah, and if some of the issues from last year continue to be issues, then the problem-solving nature that he has been touted for being able to do, I mean, that's quite. If they give up 56 sacks again, that's going to be a huge problem. And frankly, I don't know if that's likely. I hope it's not, but at the same time, man, I mean, I'm still rooting for him. I want it to be successful. I'm good with people doing it a different way. I really am. But I think when you start, loudmouth trashing guys that left the
Right.
program, that's never a good look, and it's never going to be beneficial to how you're perceived in the court of public opinion.
But he's creating. See, here's what he's doing, and I want to ask you a question for a follow up, because what he's doing, Greg, is he's creating me against the world, us against the world.
Yeah.
Okay, so look at how Kenny Dillingham's doing it at Arizona State. When he loses two of his best players, he's quote tweeting their decision, saying he's the best kid ever. Congratulations! I can't wait to see what you do with your future and who's lucky enough to get you. That's one approach. And then there's the Deion approach. It's like, to hell with you. You weren't that good anyway. If you're not in, you're out. But I do believe, and this is the question I have for you, do you think it's because it's public that we think there's a little bit of dysfunction going on there? Some of the coordinators, the whole situation last year with Coach Lou, do you think it's a little bit dysfunctional inside?
I would like to think not.
Okay.
I don't know for certain. I mean, there's no way of knowing.
Right.
Granted, 4-8 will make you feel like there's dysfunction, even if dysfunction doesn't exist. Maybe the personnel was 4-8 last year. It's just the way it was. But I do think that I feel like he was someone that was all about positivity, all about opportunity, all about being able to secure this opportunity and run with it. And now people have turned on him with the way he's handled it. So he had everyone kind of on his side to an extent, not everyone, but a lot of people on his side, and now he's lost some of those people with how he's handled the departures from his program. So he was already in the situation.
Sorry, but most of what he's saying publicly, well, first at his first team meeting, he had the Louis Vuitton quote. I'm bringing my Louis, get ready. Some of you guys are going to be out. So we knew from the start what he was going to do. But Greg, I think the biggest difference is the people that are criticizing him publicly aren't used to coaches doing this publicly.
Yeah.
You played for the greatest of all time. I'm sure he said some pretty unsavory things to some players that weren't good enough to play at Alabama behind closed doors, but back in the day, you were stuck with them.
Probably.
Right? So the people that are complaining aren't used to what goes on behind closed doors. And I'll give of all the stuff that I'm like, all right, I'll give him credit. He does it out loud. He's not hiding anything.
There's no denying that. What you see is what you get. I really believe that. So maybe that's just a breath of fresh air amongst coaching circles where it's very, very private in many ways. But I understand kind of both sides of the argument, which is why it's a fascinating topic. As we move forward, and a lot of debate is already being had about who the best team in college football is going into 2024. I have been outspoken in thinking that it's Ohio State at the moment. I think Georgia's close. But I still think Ohio State has a few more answers on both sides of the ball, given some of the departures that Georgia lost on offense with Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers being gone. So Looking at those two teams and sizing them up, who right now heading into the summer would you have at number one and who would you have at number two?
Greg McElroy, I'm telling you this. If the quarterback situation in Columbus figures itself out, if Will Howard grabs it and it's his, if they figure it out with Chip Kelly calling ball plays and everything they have coming back, I think Ohio State is the biggest problem for the entire country. They are absolutely loaded, and they don't have a weakness. And to me, this is the biggest year in Ryan Day's career at Ohio State. Why? Because he finally ceded the play calling control to a guy, by the way, who left a head coaching job at UCLA. Why? Because he just wanted to be a coach. And he didn't want to fundraise and deal with all the BS that's going on and shake hands and kiss baby. He wanted to just go call ball plays. And so now you get a guy that's ready to prove something, who's a really, really good offensive mind. You bring him in with that kind of talent, Ryan Day now adopting the CEO approach. He's lost to Michigan 3 straight years. The Harbaugh situation's gone from Ann Arbor. They lost a ton of talent off a team that just won the national championship. Based on that and everything coming back, I'm just telling you that Ohio State is top to bottom, and I think it's by a pretty decent margin, the best team in the country as we go into summer. Now, Georgia's Georgia, they reload. That's what they do. That's what they've done. That's what Kirby Smart has. He's got the quarterback coming back. He did lose Ladd McConkey. He did lose Brock Bowers, as you said, but they're always going to have talent. But just based on everything that Ohio State's done this offseason, I don't know how you don't look at them and be like, that's a damn good football team.
On paper, they're phenomenal. It'd be hard to push back on anything that you said. If they're number one in the Big Ten, who's two? Is it Oregon?
Oregon had a great offseason. And I'm still wrapping my head around that Oregon's a Big Ten team. Like, it doesn't sit right. I got to sit there and be like, who's the best team in the Pac-12? Oh, we got rid of the Pac-12.
Yeah.
Look, Dan Lanning, he is building. Remember when, I'll use this analogy and it kind of parlays with Ohio State. Remember when Urban took over at Ohio State?
Yeah.
And they were the one team. Say what you want about the Big Ten prior to them poaching for Pac-12 teams, but Big Ten football, we know what it is. It's big offensive linemen. It's north and south running backs. It's a different style of football. Well, when Urban got there, he was the one coach that from the Big Ten was still going down to Texas and getting players, and was still going down to Florida and getting players because of his relationships when he built the dynasties at Florida. He coached Ohio State to be an SEC team in the North. And Dan Lanning's doing a similar thing at Oregon. He's a guy that has ties all over the country and is building a type of school and a type of program where he's selecting.
Yeah.
And so the different type of skill that he's getting at Oregon might not necessarily, look at Michigan's a prime example. They didn't throw an entire second half of a game, and that kid just got picked in the top 10 in the NFL. It's a different style in the Big Ten.
Right.
Lanning's building an SEC type program at Oregon. And so I think they're going to come in. Candidly, what's today's date? May 6th. I haven't studied everyone's schedule yet, but you look top to bottom. Who other than Ohio State would give Oregon a problem? Michigan loses a lot of guys, right? Michigan State, year one for them. New coach, Jonathan Smith. How's that going to work out? Hard to say. Penn State, James Franklin, they're a perennial 10-2. How's that going to work out? Hard to say. But I think Oregon's loaded.
It's hard to push back on that. I think they're phenomenal. Lastly, we'll get you out of here because I can't do a whole conversation with you and not talk a little SEC. Looking at the SEC, you've already referenced Georgia's at 1. Who's 2 and who's 3? Because that, to me, is a real interesting conversation to be had right now.
I love this conversation because when you look at it as a whole, people have to comprehend, and I know this is we just got done talking about it. You have to comprehend now Texas and Oklahoma are a part of this conversation.
Right.
I believe Sark has Texas in a spot to compete year in. He's got it there now. You know what I mean? When he took over, he had to recruit, he had to purge, he had to bring in some guys, and now he has it. Okay. So now I believe Texas is going to be Texas year in and year out. Now, Brian Kelly at LSU loses Jaden Daniels, loses his 2-star receivers, has enough coming back. Is Garrett Nussmeier the answer? I think you and I both like him as a quarterback. Think he can get it around the yard and he'll be perfect for Brian Kelly. It's always LSU. And then Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss did a ton in the portal. He's always flirting with that breakthrough season, hasn't gotten over the hump yet. That's just the SEC West. Well, we got rid of divisions, but what used to be the SEC West. And then you have to look at it. How legitimate is Tennessee year in and year out with Heupel? He's had a good start to his time there in Knoxville. Florida is a big question mark. And so if I had to look at it right now, Georgia's the runaway number 1. I would put Texas number 2. I think Texas, again, is going to be really, really tough to deal with. That Silas Bolden kid they got from Oregon State, just watch how Sark uses him. He's going to be awesome. And then when you look at it, then I think it's a battle with LSU getting in there, and I think it's a battle with Ole Miss getting in there. of those teams that now, when you're looking at the pecking order in the SEC, and by the way, no longer a surprise, Eli Drinkwitz in Missouri, they got a lot of dudes coming back. And so there's kind of a cluster of teams. There's 1, 2, and then 3 teams are going to be able to fight there for 2, 3 going into the season.
It's going to be amazing, man. It's going to be awesome. Really look forward to visiting again here as we approach the summer, leading into media days. We'll have you back. Leading into the season, we'll have you back. But, man, a lot to look forward to this summer and a lot of debate to be had for sure. Matty, we appreciate you, man.
I can't wait. And one last thing for the listeners here of Always College Football. If you have a mortgage and extra money, lay it down. Brooks Koepka PGA Championship.
That's a lock.
I'm just telling you, if you can get him at 20-1 right now, throw it in there because BK is going to go run laps.
I love that you're all in on Brooks Koepka. That would be what, his 4th PGA if he wins it, thereabouts?
His 6th major championship.
4th PGA, 6th major, won it last year. I don't think anyone would be surprised. So good job taking chalk today, Matty. Well done.
Chalk, 20-1 ain't chalk, big boy. Scheffler would have been chalk.
Okay, today we're going to play the probability scale. 5 big picture topics in college football. And we put a probability on it, 1 to 10, based on how likely it is to happen. 10 being it's an absolute certainty, 1 being it's highly, highly unlikely, 0% chance. Well, 10% chance. 1 to 10, 10% chance. We're not putting it as a 0, but a 10% chance means obviously stars are going to have to align for something like this to go down. So we picked 5 good topics to kind of dive into. We'll start in the ACC. The likelihood, what is the probability of Virginia Tech competing in the ACC for the championship? I actually put this at 5. Now, people are going to push back, and this is not at all disrespectful to Virginia Tech at all. I love the returning production. I love the quality of play that they get at the quarterback spot with Kyron Drones. I love all the pieces back that are now in year 3 in Brent Pry's system. I believe that there's going to be significant growth in their program's future. The problem is I look at the top end of the ACC and I think it's really, really talented and really, really good. Now, can they knock off the likes of Clemson, Miami, and Florida State? Those would be the top 3 dogs in the ACC in my eyes. Can they knock those teams off? Sure. But what's the likelihood they do it multiple times this season? Right now, I think Virginia Tech is extremely dangerous. And I think they're a team you're looking at and you're probably thinking, okay, I can see them getting an 8. I can see them getting a 9. But is that going to be enough to get to the ACC championship game and ultimately win the ACC championship game? I don't think it's there just yet. So I put the probability on a scale of 1 to 10 of Virginia Tech competing for the ACC crown at 5. I feel like that's pretty good too, by the way. Circle next year, and I think Virginia Tech could make a boost even more, especially knowing some of the drop-off and maybe some of the guys that will be leaving Miami and some of the guys that might be leaving Florida State. And perhaps, I mean, Clemson's probably still going to be good as long as they can continue to retain talent. But I think Virginia Tech's best football is coming up very soon. I just happen to think it's going to be in 25 more so than in 2024. Scale of 1 to 10. What is the probability that Utah is the team to beat in the Big 12? This is a good question. I think the probability of them being the team to beat is about an 8. Doesn't mean that I'm picking them to win, but I think there's going to be a lot of people that are surveying the league from top to bottom. They're going to look at the stability that Kyle Whittingham has brought to Salt Lake. They're going to look at Cam Rising's return. They're going to look at some of the pieces back offensively. They're going to look, too, at the way they've hopefully addressed a couple vacancies on the defensive side of the football at all 3 levels. So I think people are going to look at the program and know that the Big 12 is very much up in the air. I mean, it's wide open. The Big 12, given what Arizona brings back, given what Utah has coming in, given what Kansas State has likely as far as a factor. Oklahoma State brings a whole bunch of folks back as well. A ton of production back for the Pokes. You look at all those teams, Kansas is dangerous. Colorado is potentially dangerous. And you look at TCU, 2 years removed from a national championship game. You think they're probably going to bounce back in a big way. I think, look at the run game that Texas Tech has. I mean, there's a lot of teams to like in the Big 12. I think it's pretty level. But I think if you were to ask the public's opinion of who the best program is right now in the Big 12, I think a lot of people are probably going to circle the Utah Utes. Coming from the Pac-12, but they've won 2 Pac-12 title games. in the last 3 years. Last year, of course, came up quite a bit short, but it wasn't because they didn't have quality. They just didn't have quality quarterback play, and it was a revolving door at that position. Now you insert a guy in the lineup that has won 2 Pac-12 title games, has started 2 Rose Bowl games. It's understandable. So I think the probability of them being at the top going into the season is about an 8 for the Utah Utes. We'll go next to the SEC. Mike Elko turns A&M into a college football playoff contender in year 1. I think the probability here is about a 3. Now, getting into the top 12 is certainly something that A&M's roster can do, but there are a lot of unknowns as it relates to Texas A&M. In part, their quarterback. Wigman, great player when available. However, he has been banged up at times in his career. You look at the offensive line. That is a legitimate question mark for me. A&M's offensive line, bunch of guys that are going to be coming in. Yeah, they've had a couple guys in the portal. Hopefully they're more consistent. I think they'll be all right. But I still think the offensive line is a big question mark going into the year. I think they're going to be fine at running back. They should be good at wide receiver. Defensive front should be elite in some areas. I think they have a chance to be, that's for sure. But you look at the second and third level defensively, should be really good, even though they will miss Edgerrin Cooper there at middle linebacker, who was among the best at his position in the country last year. But we're talking about the college football playoff here. We're talking about the CFP. And I think if you're in the SEC, you are in the playoff field more than likely at 10-2 or better. If you're anything less than that, you're probably not going to get there. And I know, talk to most Aggie fans, I think they're really optimistic with what Elko is going to bring, the stability he's going to bring to the program, the level of detail that he's going to bring to the defensive side. And you got to hope that with what Coach Klein is going to do offensively, their offensive coordinator, they're going to be much more organized on that side of the ball and probably a little more creative. So there's a lot of reasons to feel good about A&M this year, but I look at them more as a dangerous team. You kind of put them in the contender category, then you put them in the dangerous team category, and then you put everybody else kind of in another category separately. They're in category 2. Not yet quite a contender, but not a team you really want to play, which is a great place to be if you are Mike Elko stepping into this position. I think they can beat anyone on their schedule. Granted, the stars might have to align, but they can beat anyone on their schedule. But could they also lose to a few teams on their schedule that you wouldn't expect them to lose to? I think that's a realistic possibility too, especially in year number 1. So I think A&M is going to have a really good year, and they're going to be a team that nobody wants to play, but will they be consistent enough to make it to the 12-team playoff? That I think is a bit far-fetched. So I put the probability right now in year 1 at a 3. A little low, I think, probably for Aggie fans, but I hope you understand that I am very optimistic about the long-term growth, stability, organizational resources, overall resources of the A&M program down the road. Let's go next. Keep it in the SEC. Ole Miss. Ole Miss is a top 3 team in the SEC. What's the probability of that? I'm going to say the probability is a 7. Now, like I said, 10 is a lock. 9, highly likely. 8, very likely. 7, likely. I think it's likely they're a top 3 team in the SEC. But one thing we have acknowledged, look at the schedule. The schedule is manageable, relatively speaking. And that's where I think a lot of people are becoming very bullish about Ole Miss. Very manageable schedule. Couple of teams that have been on the schedule for quite a while roll off. So I think you're looking at a strong possibility that Ole Miss is in the playoff conversation at season's end. But I think a top 3 team in the SEC is a lock to get in the playoff. I think Ole Miss will be right there. But what we haven't seen from Lane Kiffin is the ability to win those games against top-tier competition. They've been competitive at times. They've had the ball in their court a couple times, but they haven't quite been able to get over the hump against the top teams in the sport. Now, you look at their schedule, there's not a ton of those top teams in the sport that's on that Ole Miss schedule. But I think they're right now in the contender category, believe it or not. But top 3 in the SEC, a top 3 that I think is probably going to be determined by Alabama and Georgia, who are likely going to be in the top 3. Then you have Texas, likely going to be in the top 3. Then you have the outsiders of those top 3 that could make a move, whether it's Tennessee, Missouri, Ole Miss. I think those 3 teams are kind of vying to offset one of those top 3 teams that's established and maybe knock them down a ring. So I think it's likely, but I'm going to put it at 7. because I just haven't seen Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss knock off one of those contenders in his time at Ole Miss up to this point. But this might be his best roster, and this might be his best chance to really break down the door and do something really special there in Oxford, Mississippi. And then finally, in the Big Ten, Oregon against Ohio State is the game of the year. The probability on this one might surprise you. I'm going to say it's an 8. Now, it could be one of 2 times we see this matchup next year. So does that water it down potentially? Perhaps. But if I were to rank the Big Ten teams top to bottom right now, I would say it's Ohio State 1, Oregon 2. No disrespect to what Michigan's done. They just have had a lot of turnover. No disrespect to what Penn State is. They just haven't quite been able to knock down the door that is Michigan and Ohio State, but maybe they're more equipped to do so this year. I look at this game, I think it's going to be phenomenal. Between this game, Georgia and Texas, which is on the schedule, Bama and Georgia, which is on the schedule, there's a bunch of really high-quality candidates, which is why I'm not putting this at a 10. I'm putting it at an 8, but I think Oregon and Ohio State could be as big of a regular season game as we have on the schedule this upcoming season, which is a big difference from what it's been these last couple of years. It's been very obvious what the top game was. That game was Michigan and Ohio State. Winner is in the playoff. Loser might still be in the playoff depending on what happens elsewhere. This year, I think Oregon and Ohio State is right up there next to Texas and Georgia and Bama and Georgia as the top games in the sport. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. Before we get out of here, I want to acknowledge that Ethan Kaliakmanis has been named the starting quarterback of the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Formerly of Minnesota, he transferred over and beat out the incumbent Gavin Wimsatt, who had some inconsistencies last year. Wimsatt has ultimately entered the portal as a result. So it will be interesting to see exactly how it's all going to work out. But if you look at the weapons that Kaliakmanis has, I think his receiver core at Rutgers is significantly better than the receiver core he took the field with at Minnesota. And he's got a lot of arm talent. So maybe he can have a great year in the new look Big Ten for Greg Schiano and the Scarlet Knights. So that'll do it for us here at Always College Football. Continue to encourage all of you to like, rate, and subscribe to the show wherever you get your show. Continue to support us on the podcast platform by leaving a rating, leaving a review. It really helps us out an awful lot, especially accounting for all those one-star reviews that we got from people that were frustrated with how the playoff went down last year. The podcast is still pretty good, and it hasn't changed. It's just people are mad that their team didn't get in the playoffs. So as a result, we've gotten a really bad rating. So help us offset that if you could. It'd mean a lot to us. So for all of us here at Always College Football, for Mark, who's not here, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have a tremendous day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.